Insider presents Geek Speak with Matthew Harris and Meredith Lachlan. We cover entertainment, news, and tech with special guest appearances. So sit back and enjoy as we geek out together right now.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Geek Speak. I'm Meredith Lachlan with my co-chair, Matthew Harris, and we have a special guest this evening, Tim English. He is a music historian, author of some titles which include Sounds Like Teen Spirit and Popology, and his latest book, which is available on Amazon, is John Lennon 1980 Playlist, which is very timely because it happens to be the 40th anniversary of John Lennon's death this year. And I'm just going to drop our card here. Welcome, Tim English. Thank you so much for sitting with us this evening.
Hey, great to be with you guys.
Well, what else besides music historian? What else do you do?
Or is that it? Are you?
I know there's more to you than that. This is Geek Insider.
Can you actually make a living off of writing these books? Is that what you're asking me?
Well, that is, we have a lot of writer friends and they're like, nope, got to go to that job first.
What's your name? Is John Grisham or one of those guys? Yeah, you probably have another gig you have to work to. Mm-hmm. And my background is in sales, which, sales is in everything. It certainly comes in handy when you're out hawking one of these books. So that served me well in making contacts with people and presenting it to people and being able to talk about it and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Now, what was your first music history book? Was it the Sounds Like Teen Spirit?
I published Sounds Like Teen Spirit in around 2006. And really tell you what happened with that. I happened to send it to Howard Stern. And one night I just happened to Google the book, and I saw that Howard had talked about it, and it was way up on the charts. It was in the top 1,000 overall on Amazon, which was pretty incredible for some guy just typing away in New Jersey. But Howard really helped put it on the map. That book had to do with songs that appear to have ripped off their melodies from earlier songs. It's the first book ever on the topic, and still the only one. And just was a great topic for radio. I ended up doing, I lost count, probably 2,000 radio interviews promoting the book. And it was cool because people could play one song, and maybe George Harrison's My Sweet Lord, and then the Chopin's He's So Fine. And you give people an aha moment where, they'd heard two songs a million times, but never realized that one had influenced the other. Like the Doors' Hello, I Love You is the Kinks' All Day and All the Night. The Bachman Turner Overdrives, You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet, copies the riff from the Who's Baba O'Reilly, just two examples. But I delved into a lot of stuff with obviously Led Zeppelin. They, purloined quite a few things without credit, and also the Beatles and the Stones. And then I published a second edition, like a kitchen sink edition of Sounds Like Teen Spirit in 2016. It's about triple the original size. In between, I wrote a book called Popology, which examined the role of music and how the music of the 60s intersected in the lives of four of the icons of that era, John and Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and more obscure figure, the monk Thomas Merton. And turned out that was, maybe a smaller audience for that one, but I'm very proud of that. It had a lot of information that you may have read 10 books about any of those figures, and I managed to find a lot of information that wasn't in any other book. So that covers it basically. And then now in 2020, John Lennon 1980 Playlist.
Now tell everybody about the new book, about the John Lennon 1980 Playlist, because I was completely fooled by the Sounds Like Teen Spirit, because obviously I thought it was going to be about Kurt Cobain. And so you just given that explanation out, I want that book. But so tell everybody about the John Lennon one, because it's not just your normal history book about John Lennon.
No, and Sounds Like Teen Spirit. I mean, the title comes from the fact that Smells Like Teen Spirit the riff from that is loosely based on Boston's More Than a Feeling, and which a lot of people don't know. But
now I'm going to have to listen very carefully.
I played that. I played that. We were playing when all my appearances to promote that. We'd always play back to back, and there was a radio host. When he heard that, he just lost it. He started like freaking out on the air. I thought he was going to have a nervous breakdown. He just couldn't believe that, there it was. And, one of the cool things about that was that, and it relates to the John Lennon book too, is that creative people listen to a broad range of music and are very open to all different styles of music. You wouldn't think of Kurt Cobain listening to Boston's first album, possibly. Maybe you wouldn't think of John Lennon listening to Big Crosby or Noel Coward, but they did. And, I think it says a lot about, these two guys who were musical geniuses and, that they were very curious about music of all types, not just what was cool or hip at the time.
Mm-hmm. Now, Tim, with your love of history and music, there's got to be an intrinsic love of music. Are you a musician as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an amateur hack, but yeah, I do play the guitar and keyboard too. But yeah, I certainly love music and appreciate the guys who do it well.
Yeah.
And girls.
Well, I was going to say, my brother is a musician. He loves to play guitar. He can play bass. He can play pretty much a lot of instruments that are put in front of him. And he says a lot of the popular music are basically made with 3 or 4 chords,
True.
So with that limited amount of notes that are out there in the world, it's really hard to be completely original.
As people would remind me often when I was promoting Sounds Like Teen Spirit, they'd say, there's only, eight notes. I say, really? Well, there are only so many words in the alphabet too, right? And only so many words that we use all the time. But, if you veer too close to taking somebody else's work, you get in trouble with the lawyers. But yeah, it's true. I mean, rock and roll is certainly, much of it is based on 3 chords, 3 or 4 chords, country music, the 3 chords and the truth. But
and didn't AC/DC only ever use like 3 chords? Yeah.
Yeah, I would certainly sound but there were 3 very good chords though.
This is true. This is true.
They chose well. But, I think you make a good point. And what I would say about that is I think a lot of people are intimidated about making music. They see some of these great virtuosos like a Van Halen or some great pianist, and they think, oh my God, I'll never be able to do that. Well, you do what you can, I mean, not everybody can be the virtuoso. And a lot of the great songwriters, the Beatles, for instance, none of them could actually read notarized music, and they seem to do all right, So if you can get in the studio and, show people a chord chart and write down the chords to the song, I mean, you can do 99% of what everybody else does. So I think a lot of people maybe, first of all, people are discouraged from doing anything artistic at all. Oh, that's crazy. Oh, you want to be an actor? There, you want to be, John Zanto, you never get anywhere with that guitar. I mean, come on, they've told Brian Epstein, Decca Records guy, guitar groups are on the way out. I mean, come on, what are you talking about? So there's always plenty of people to discourage anybody that wants to be creative, but you just gotta, keep plowing on and believe in yourself, I guess.
Yeah. And Just Josh and Podcast is over on Twitch. He's tuning in. And he says AC/DC only needed 3 chords.
This is true. Now, how did you get into being a music historian? Was that something that you just had an interest in from early on, or did you just kind of
trip into it?
Right, exactly.
I mean, I'm a musical historian by virtue of the fact that I've written these books. I'm not a music historian by virtue of the fact that I've gotten a PhD in the topic or anything like that.
Gotcha.
I had the idea for Sounds Like Teen Spirit many years ago because I was always intrigued by songs. I'd hear one song and I'd think, hey, that sounds like something else, and why is that? And did the person taking it, were they aware of the song that came first? Were there any connections there? And I just thought that was a fascinating topic. And to hear one melody in another, was very interesting. Wow, they ripped that off. I remember Led Zeppelin's Trampled Underfoot, great song. But I remember the first time I ever heard that, I said, wait a minute, that's that Doobie Brothers song, Long Train Running Without Love, and, from back at that time, I always sort of, and then, I said, hey, that would be a cool topic for a book. And, I just thought about the idea. I used to go to the bookstore when we had bookstores. Nobody else had ever, to see if anybody else had done the topic, and nobody ever did. So it was left to yours truly to take it up, and that's what I did.
For you to be able to pick up on that, you have to have a really good ear and maybe a little bit of savant.
Well, because they're not all as obvious as, Ice Ice Baby and Under Pressure.
Right.
They're just not all that obvious. And it's just like 2 months ago, the lawsuit finally got settled between Led Zeppelin and I forget the group with Stairway.
Spirit, over a song called Taurus.
Exactly. And, that one, you have to admit, it's pretty damn close, but they found.
But, the plaintiffs in that were hampered, though, because they were unable to play the Spirit song Taurus for the jury. All they could do was have a transcription of what was copyrighted, the notation that had been copyrighted, which was probably a Swipshod type of thing. Oh, here it is. And all they could do was have somebody play that, which probably didn't sound too much like Stairway to Heaven. But you're right. If you listen to the original recording, which came out in, I believe, early 1968, and as I document in my book, Led Zeppelin were well aware of Spirit's music. They actually played a couple of shows with them on Zeppelin's first tour. I think he may have actually mentioned the band, Jimmy Page, a couple of times. But they were hampered. The songs do sound quite a lot. Is it the whole song? No, it's only about maybe a third of Stairway to Heaven where there's a similarity because it has different sections. We're talking about the very, very beginning of the song, but they were hampered in that they, because of copyright law, all they could do was to play the transcribed notation and not play the album track, which does sound quite a lot like Stairway to Heaven.
Now, we still haven't really. We've been touching on this one book, and like I said, I've definitely got a kid. It sounds like Teen Spirit, but the John Lennon book, the 1980 playlist. How did this come about? I mean, were you just kind of going, I wonder what the hell John Lennon was listening to in 1980, or what influenced his comeback? I mean, I know there had to be several different angles, but how did that book come about?
Well, like my other books, I guess I try to write a book that I would want to read myself if another author had published it. And in thinking about John Lennon and the year 1980, at one point I thought, there's so many interesting things going on in 1980. Maybe that would make an interesting book. But as I thought about it, I said, well, John was going to be a big part of that book. As I thought about it, I said, why not just take the most interesting aspect of that year, which, to me at least, which was John Lennon's journey through that year. And then, thinking about how you could approach this subject that's had so many books written about him. So many people think, oh, I heard it all. I know everything. And, and I'm the same way. I always look for some new angle to learn more. And I thought by, examining the music that was part of his life, both the songs that were really important and that they actually influenced some crucial decisions he made that year, and also just songs that he was interested in, songs he referenced to his musicians, and trying to show how they resonated in his life in 1980 and also with his earlier work with the Beatles and solo. So I thought it was a good window and a good perspective to give people a new perspective on John, maybe give them some new insights, and try to provide even the real Beatlemaniacs with some new information that they probably hadn't heard before.
Well, with your research for this book, were you able to sit down and interview people who were in his life? Yoko Ono, maybe his sons, maybe some music producers and things like that, to get some of these really insightful backstories.
I did correspond with a number of people, some people that had worked on the Double Fantasy with them. I corresponded with the man who was actually in the studio with John a couple of nights before he was killed, and I include that in the book, his observations, which were really cool. I tell some new stories in the book that I don't think many people are not aware of. I tell the story of why he was back in the studio again within about 2 weeks after Double Fantasy had been released, which there's a good reason for that, which I don't think most people are aware of.
And you'll have to buy the book.
Now, and I did see Meredith is getting the book, but unfortunately we weren't able to get it before the interview here. And we did get a electronic copy, and I had a chance to look through a little bit of it. But there were so many points in there of what things that you're going to be able to find out about John Lennon. And one of the questions that I had, though, was you discuss why John initially stopped recording and releasing music in the mid 70s. Can you give us a little insight on why he walked away at that point?
Well, I think a key event, he had his so-called lost weekend from maybe September 73. He went back to Yoko at the Dakota in early 1975, and then he finished off the kind of ill-fated rock and roll album at that time. And then in the spring of 75, Yoko got pregnant. John actually had some sessions scheduled to go back in and go working on a new album, I think in April or May of 75. When Yoko got pregnant, he canceled those. So right from the beginning, I think he had the idea. Yoko was not a kid at the time. She was approaching 40, I guess. And we think, no, over 40. Yeah, approaching 50. So, he wanted to be there for her. He wanted to be there for his son the way he wasn't able to for his first child. I think, he was a little bit burnt out, I would say. He had been through this long battle with the U.S. government over his immigration status that lasted for a long time. He was under surveillance by the FBI for quite a long time, as is documented in the files that have come out. And he later talked about his Mind Games album from 73 and Walls and Bridges from 74, and said they were just kind of workmanlike. They can tell that it's an artist in pain and things like that. They had some great songs on those albums, of course, because it was still John Lennon. But I think creatively he needed to get inspired again at that time. And with the birth of his son, Sean, on John's birthday on October 9th, 1975, and the lapsing of his contract with Capital EMI in early 76, the opportunity presented itself to take some time off and really be there and be a dad and be a husband and be there for his family the way he hadn't for his first child.
Yeah, I mean, Yoko Ono was vilified. She was blamed for ending his career, and we're like, wait a minute,
unjustly,
yeah. And I mean, he's a grown guy,
Well, by all accounts, he was no pushover for anybody.
Exactly.
He said that himself. He said, if you think that I'm a tool of this woman or being used as a puppet, he said, you're insulting me. And, by all accounts, I mean, even his fellow Beatles, they were kind of afraid of him. They didn't want to ever ruffle his feathers because he could get very angry very quickly and let you know about it. So, but I show in the book how unusual this was at the time. I mean, John had put out an album a year from 1970 through 1975, if you want to include the rock and roll covers album. And that was standard practice for, and I show how his contemporaries, Dylan, Elton John, Bowie, Paul McCartney, they basically, you would put out an album a year. That's what they did at the time. Right. And for somebody to just say, that's it, bye, I'm taking off for 5-6 years was extremely unusual.
Mhm.
It was. And, and that's one thing, though, that in my entire life, I've kind of always been shocked about is that some of these guys, they make enough money within those, 5-10 years that they could happily retire. And that's what I was kind of wondering is, did he just say, okay, I'm done. I've made enough money. I'm ready to chill. And then, he had the inspiration and decided to head back in. But it really sounds like John had his head in the right place. He wanted to take care of his family. He was out of the contract. He's finally done with litigation. The feds were no longer, up his ass. And
he gets his green card in 76.
Mhm.
yeah, and so it just sounds like he was just ready for a much deserved break. And speaking of, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think part of it, though, too, was creatively, he had kind of lost the plot a little bit because when they came back in 1980, they sort of the party line was, well, he went to Bermuda and got inspired and everything, all the songs came. That wasn't exactly the way it was. He really was working on music through those years, as we saw with the Lost Lennon tapes. We had all these work tapes of his many songs that came out. But, make a long story short, Yoko said, well, he was working on stuff, but I don't think he was really that satisfied with what he was turning out during those years. And so, I think there is some truth to the fact that when you get to 1980, especially his sailing trip to Bermuda, where he was out there by himself at one point, just him against the elements, and he really got re-inspired and in touch again with the person that he was, the real John Lennon, not the Beatle, not the famous person. And that really, but when he got to Bermuda right away, he's buying boomboxes and working on songs and recording demos that would become the basis of Double Fantasy.
Well,
Very cool.
I definitely want to touch on that a little bit more, but we're going to take a really quick break. So, Tim, if you need a sip of water or something like that, you have about 30 seconds.
Cool. Okay.
Check it out. MobileEdge.com has award-winning products with innovative features and contemporary, edgy designs that empower you to look sharp and travel smart with your mobile tech. Your beloved, not to mention expensive gaming gear and mobile tech devices are an extension of you, so give them the protection and style they deserve wherever you go. Find them at MobileEdge.com and protect your tech with Mobile Edge. Bring it on. Hey Geek Insiders, Mobile Edge has a special coupon code for our dedicated listeners. Get 25% off your Mobile Edge gear using coupon code GEEK25. That's GEEK25. Geek out.
And we're back with Tim English. He is the author of John Lennon 1980 playlist that is available over on Amazon. Make sure that you get a copy of that today. The question that I wanted to ask you was, because it touched a nerve what you said right before break, was that he went out on his own, that, just fighting the elements and things like that, and the music came back. A lot of times I think we need that break to get in touch with nature and find the music again and find the joy in it. Did he, beyond the litigation and all the other stuff that was kind of going on, do you have a clue as to whether or not maybe music was just something that he had to step away from because it was just no longer fun anymore?
I think that's possible. I mean, by one account, or maybe even John said himself, said he listened to Muzak, the piped-in music service. He wasn't really listening that much to what was on the radio. But as I document in the book, that's, again, not exactly true, because I document a lot of cases where, we can document that he was aware of what was going on in the pop music world. He was actually listening to Blondie as far back as 1976. He actually went to see Devo even before they had an album out, according to Mark Mothersbaugh of Devo, at Max's Kansas City, downtown in New York. And Mark, far from being a monk during his house husband years, John was slightly inebriated, according to Mothersbaugh. And as he was waiting outside for people to leave the club, an inebriated John sticks his head in the window of the van and starts singing the Devo song "Uncontrollable Urge," which they presumably had just played. And John picked up on it as a part, go, yeah, 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 yeah. And he had picked up on that, it's similar to "She Loves You." And also the guitars were sort of similar to "I Want to Hold Your Hand." So, those are just a couple of examples of how, I think he was still, while he was doing his house husband things, and taking care of Sean and stuff like that, but he was, still aware of what was going on in the music world. I mean, how could you not be if you were him?
Right. And I'm sorry, I just lost my place here. I did have a question written down. This was another thing. This was actually in the notes from your PR person, and I jotted it down. You said that, you can speak on this, what John really thought of disco, country, gospel, reggae, funk, punk, and jazz.
That's a very long answer. We take them one at a time. How about that?
Yeah, or just a couple of them. You ain't got to go into all of them.
Well, disco was in its ascendancy in the years maybe 74 through 79. 79, you had the Disco Demolition Night in Chicago, and whether by accident or not, or coincidence, disco really took a downturn in the U.S. after that. The Bee Gees couldn't get arrested, but prior to that, it was really dominant on the charts. And John was on with Tom Snyder in early spring of 1975, and Tom asked him, he said, "What music do you like now?" And he said, "I like disco. It's great music." And his song, the song was his only #1 hit while he was alive in the U.S., "Whatever Gets You Through the Night," that was inspired by the George McRae song "Rock Your Baby." John kind of took the guitar lick from that and really liked it, and then began jamming on that and came up with "Whatever Gets You Through the Night." John was a big fan of Donna Summer. Quite a few of his 1980 interviews, when he's asked what music you like now, he would mention Donna Summer. As I document in the book, he had a copy of her 45 Hot Stuff. He liked her song, "The Wanderer," from the fall of 1980, because he heard her doing some Elvis vocalizations in there that he picked up on and liked a lot. So, reggae, country. He was a big fan of Bob Marley. He actually played Bob Marley's song "Get Up, Stand Up" for his Double Fantasy musicians, saying, "Here, I want you to hear something beautiful, not to imitate it, but just, I guess, to get inspired." I think when they were playing his sort of reggae song, "Borrowed Time." So anyway, he was a big fan of Bob Marley from way back, and the Bob Marley and the Wailers song "Hallelujah Time," which is also on the Burnin' album, one of John's favorite albums, that actually has a line about living on borrowed time. John heard that. This is in Bermuda in June of 1980, and he says, "I'm gonna write my own song around with that." I think he'd been looking for a title, and that gave him the title, and the result was his song "Borrowed Time."
Mm-hmm.
Now, do we see so many trends and popular things from the 70s and 80s, even the 90s, coming back around. Do you think disco will ever make a comeback?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, even writing it, as I just said, disco, the name had developed a bad connotation for some people, but they just renamed it dance music. I mean, dance music never went away. I mean, if you think about it, Madonna comes along just a couple of years after that. It just kind of got renamed, I think, dance music, and people wanted to go out and dance. None of that really ever changed. But, you talk about how you have like some people into the 90s or the 80s, and there was people forget there was a big wave of 1960s nostalgia during the 1970s, probably starting around 1974. Maybe it started with American Graffiti. I don't know, somewhere in there. But, there's just all this nostalgia for the 60s as some sort of golden age, because the 70s were all about, recession. And we had an ignominious end to the Vietnam War. We had the oil embargo. Then we had long gas lines and, all the problems with the economy. And people started looking back at the 60s, forgetting about the riots and the assassinations and the Vietnam War. And that was a pretty, at least there was some optimism, which there was in the early part of the 1960s. And so people had this wave of nostalgia for the 60s, and in some ways didn't go away for a long, long time, because the baby boomers, they were the ones calling the shots and have been for many years, maybe still are. So we had a lot of 60s nostalgia. The Beatles were certainly a big part of that. They were getting on covers of magazines in the 70s, and you kept getting, when are they getting back together? I mean, they must have been asked that question ad nauseum, whether on the street or in interviews. And it's funny, interesting. You read John's interviews in 1980. It's like people understand that something big, something really profound happened during the 1960s culturally, and the Beatles were a big part of it. But they still kind of coming to grips as to exactly what it was and what role did the Beatles play. Did they instigate it? Were they just riding along with it? And I think now, as we look back over 50 years ago, you see what a great influence the Beatles were on the world. I mean, just in so many ways, whether it would be Eastern religion, whether it would be the way guys wore their hair, music. And then, but even in the 70s, John as a house husband was ahead of his time with that. That wasn't a thing that now we take it for granted a little bit more, but at the time that was really unusual for any man to say, hey, I'm gonna step aside from my career and stay home with my child.
Oh yeah, especially having a successful career, and just putting it on pause. But you invoked Madonna's name, and I hope that's something that might be on your list as something to write about in the future. But I did have a question about what John thought about certain artists that were out there, because you think about the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. It's kind of like the Coke and Pepsi. You either liked one or the other. You generally could stomach the other, but it wasn't maybe your cup of tea. What was his thought on them? Was it competition? Did he admire them? What was it like?
I would say yes to both of those questions. He was competitive with them. He'd sometimes say some nasty things about them, but he admired them. He considered them contemporaries, which he didn't consider that of many people. I'd say maybe Dylan and David Bowie, and of course Paul McCartney, he would think were in his league, but not too many others. As far as the Stones go, I mean, they were pretty tight. In May Pang's book, she talks about, I guess it was in 1974, late in 1974, her and John were hanging out at Mick Jagger's house out in the Hamptons for a weekend. So they were very friendly. This film, one of the few films of John from his house husband years, he's with Mick Jagger, had joined John, Yoko, and Sean at the circus of all things. Probably the last place you would expect two rock stars.
Was anybody paying attention to like the three-ring circus or?
Right, just watching them.
Probably not. I stumbled on a story in Ronnie Wood's memoir, which I don't think many people are aware of, where he tells the story, and for obvious reasons, as you'll see, he's a little foggy on the dates of it, but he puts it in 1978, where John came over while the Stones were hanging out at the Plaza Hotel, and they spent a day or afternoon doing drugs together, and later jammed at Atlantic Studios, according to Woody, with John leading him through some rock and roll oldies. And Woody even says maybe there's a tape in the vaults of that, which, hey, somebody ought to look for that.
No kidding.
And then John was a big fan of Miss You. Somebody was riding in the car with him, and it came on, and he said, "Crank that up! What a great song!" As I wrote it sounds like Teen Spirit, though. John suspected that Mick Jagger had ripped off "Miss You" from John's Walls and Bridges track. Bless You. You say, hey, he just sped it up, I should have sped it up, and I would have had the hit set of the Stones. But he was asked in 1980 about Emotional Rescue, and he said he liked it. He said it was a beautiful song, and he was defending Mick Jagger, like saying, why don't they give him a break? John would wear that T-shirt of the Some Girls T-shirt around. There are many pictures of him wearing the same shirt based on the Stones' Some Girls cover. One funny story I found, the photographer Ethan Russell was there when they were filming a video day before Thanksgiving. They were filming John and Yoko in Central Park for a prospective video for Woman, which John had already decided was going to be the second single from the album. And the video director said, "Why don't you lip sync along to the song? All we have is you walking around the park." And John declined to do that. He said, "I'm 40 years old. I don't want to be like Mick Jagger prancing in front of the camera in some stupid video." Yeah, I think overall though, I think he liked the Stones and respected them a lot.
Now, I didn't get into the Beatles until later in life. I grew up in a Christian household that in the 70s and 80s, and they pushed the whole thing that rock and roll was bad, and all we listened to was country. And then I got out of my parents' house and realized, Metallica wasn't all about drugs and war. They were actually against that stuff. And then I found the Beatles, and I absolutely love a lot of the music from the 60s. But were you into the Beatles, early on in life, and John in extension, or was this something, that's something that you wanted to dive into more, or you wanted to know more about, or was this something that kind of just grew over time?
I've loved the Beatles for a long, long time. When I was a teenager in the 70s, I was one of those people. I said, "Oh, I missed out on everything. I missed out on all the action." I became very, I don't know if the word is obsessed, but I became very interested in the 60s as a decade, and I'd read everything I could about the Beatles. I was always fascinated of how the music reflected the time and vice versa. I mean, it's really amazing. I mean, if you just on those two albums that I mentioned, where the Red Album on the front and back covers, they would have how the Beatles looked in 1963 when they shot the cover for their first album, Please Please Me, at the EMI house in London. And then they were doing a copy of that cover in 1969 for a prospective cover for the Get Back album, which of course never came out. But in the one picture, they're clean scrubbed. They've got no facial hair. They got short hair. And then in the one from the from 69, they got the hair down to here. Most of them have beards. They look like totally different guys. You're like, what happened? This is 6-year difference. But then you listen to the music, how they went from recording "I Want to Hold Your Hand" in fall of 1963 to 3 years later. They're recording 3 years. They're recording Penny Lane and
Well, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds is like, we don't know what that is.
Yeah, well, and that was just a short time after. But yeah, I mean, but it wasn't only them. It was what was going on in the culture at the time, where you had all these things, and really, a large part of it, I think, was just the demographics of it. The demographics can explain a lot, I think, but just that you had this huge population of young people that were born after World War II. They were born into affluence. So, and they're all coming of age at the same time. They sort of have their own culture. You had this generation gap develop. So, when people would say the Beatles were very wise not to ever try to recreate that or get back together. It's that philosophical thing. You can never stick your hand in the water the same place twice. You can only do it once. And time, the Beatles were so much of their time, reflecting the time and that milieu, what was going on. You could never have anything to try to replicate that would have been a disappointment. And John said, "We already did the magic trick. You want us to do it all over again just because you missed it? Well, sorry. Listen to the records. It's all there for you if you want to listen to it." But it's amazing. I was reading Mark Lewinson's book. If you want to do a deep dive on the Beatles, he really gives them a proper biography, and it only takes up to New Year's Eve 1962, when they're on the cusp of fame, because they've just cut Please Please Me, and inspired by Bing Crosby, by the way, that song. But really, it was almost a calendar decade of the 60s was a magical time, I found from reading that book. John met Paul in the summer of 57, and people think, oh, everything just took off from there. It wasn't really so. Yes, they met and they were writing songs, and they had the band, and George joined. But by late 1959, hardly anything's going on. They hadn't played. They only played a couple of gigs in the last few months. They had stopped writing songs together at that time. But the calendar turns. You get into 1960. All of a sudden, things start happening. They go on a tour of Scotland, backing up another singer named Johnny Gentle, the unfortunately named Johnny Gentle, as Paul said in the Beatles documentary. And of course, we know what happened in the 60s. They're by summer of 60, they're in Hamburg. They've got Pete Best on board. They finally have a drummer. And Hamburg is really where they cut their chops. And then the three of them were never together. Four of them were never together in the studio after 1969. I think the three of them got together for a couple of finishing off a couple of tracks for Let It Be in January of 1970, and that was it. So it's almost like this band that's so associated with the 60s was that calendar was a magical time for them. Not much happened in the 50s for them. Not much happened, at least for the four of them, after 1970, 69, 70.
Did you ever get to see him in concert then?
No. I was a youngster at the time. And
Well,
my parents wouldn't have stood for it anyway.
Well, I was just wondering because you had mentioned being a teen in the 70s. I was a teen in the 80s, so of course I didn't get to see him. And like I said, I didn't even get into him until late. But I was lucky enough, to see the best concert to me that I got to see was a Pink Floyd concert, and this was 86, 87. And so I know it wasn't anywhere near, what those concerts from the early 70s, the mid 70s, and of course the 60s were. And I did see a lot of kick-ass country concerts, but they don't compare to some of the rock and roll. I mean, even Heart put on a badass concert in the 80s that I consider one of the best concerts I ever went to. And we have a question that we ask at the end of the show, but I had told Meredith the other day, because we love our musical guests. We have musicians on here and bands. We've got a very popular band, a girl band that's coming on Monday. And so I have a question for you. I'm probably going to save this till the end for most other guests, but you're going to be the first one that I ask. And I think it's really appropriate because you have this wide range of taste. And that's if, the world just really went crazy tomorrow and you could only listen to one album.
You mean it hasn't already? I thought it already.
Well, I mean, even crazier. 2020.
Crazy. Okay.
2020 you're stuck on a remote island by yourself.
Okay.
And you can only listen to one album for the rest of your life. Which album would it be?
We're going to leave out like best ofs and all that. You know what? The first one that comes to mind is the first Doors album. Probably that version, the long version of Light My Fire, might be my favorite piece of music ever. And the rest of it is very good too. So, I mean, if you made me choose, that's the first one that comes to mind. But obviously there are many other great ones.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But that one holds up very well, considering it's 53 or 4 years old. Still sounds great. Yeah.
And, I like a lot of the albums that are like the themed kind of albums. I love Moody Blues, Delicate Sound, or Days of Future Past. Of course, Pink Floyd, The Wall, Dark Side of the Moon, or The Dark Side of the Moon. But you just reminded me about the Doors, because just the other night, my wife and I, we started a fire in the pit out front. We were sitting out. It was a nice clear night, wasn't too cold, and we were sitting there just listening to the Doors and looking at the sky. And I love me some Morrison.
I think the Doors are. I was talking to somebody about the Doors one time. I said they're somewhere between really profound. They have walking a line between sometimes buffoonery and being the most profound thing you could have, and it's very strange how they do that. But I just think their music was so well produced, and talk about a band. I mean, they only did 6 albums in just a handful of years, and they still sound great today.
They definitely do. Meredith, go ahead.
Yeah, I did want to say, because there's a little bit of evil in me and I can't help it. So we talked about the Rolling Stones and how John Lennon felt about that. Were there any bands or single artists that he just could not take.
Stomach.
Yeah. I'm trying to be nice, but
Yeah.
evil.
I'm sure there were. I'm just trying to think of going back to the early days. I mean, they didn't really care for some of those crooner type people. I think they didn't care for. He didn't really. I'm just going off the top of my head. I'm trying to think of anybody that he really went on the record of not liking. He said something a little nasty about John Denver. I remember one of his interviews where he said they're talking about Paul's song Blackbird, and the interviewer said, "Hey, that's great musicianship, great guitar playing." And he said, "Yeah, well, so is John Denver, you know." I was trying to put it down, I think, you know. But for the most part, no. I mean, somebody wrote replied to me something on Facebook about my book and said, "Gee, you really like some bad music."
Oh,
Because
Wow.
you know, in the book I talked about how John said he just liked whatever was on the charts, and he was on the record in 1980 as expressing that he liked Christopher Cross's Sailing, he liked Olivia Newton-John's Magic, he liked ELO's All Over the World. You know, he was a big fan of the Jermaine Jackson song Let's Get Serious, which is
Oh, wow.
really funky Stevie Wonder. It's basically Stevie Wonder and everything but name. Stevie wrote it and produced it and played all the instruments on it. You know, but he would say he liked whatever was in the top 10, he would listen to it, and he liked a lot of it. He said, "I just like good pop music." So, you know, there was that side of him for sure.
Now, you know, Queen is a band that a lot of people either love or hate. But I've noticed that Queen had a little bit of influence on Double Fantasy. Is that what songs were
They
involved
did.
with that?
Yeah, I mean, there are a handful of songs, as I said at the beginning, that were crucial in John's decision making in 1980, really in the decision to go back into the studio. And Queen's crazy little thing called Love, a very un-Queen-like song, I think.
Yes.
You know, it doesn't have the typical Queen bombast that we all
I didn't
like.
even know it was Queen, Tim, until I'm going to say within the last 5 years. And I like Queen, but I did
Wow.
not know that was Queen.
Well, it was a #1 hit in the U.S. for a couple of weeks in the spring of early 1980. John heard that, and he said, "Wow, they're doing Elvis," you know. And John was the biggest Elvis fan in the world. He said, "That's my era, and maybe it's time that I come back now." And John later said, he said, "The music of 1980." He said, "This is the best era for music since the 1960s." And if you think about all the great music of the 60s, to have John Lennon say that, it speaks very well to what was going on musically in 1980. There was a lot, you know, it was the height of new wave. You had bands like The Clash. Springsteen released The River that year. You know, the Stones had a #1 album with Emotional Rescue. John liked the Pretenders a lot. Their song Brass in Pocket. You know, he was really digging what was going on in the music world in 1980.
I think a lot of that is very cyclical, you know, and I think you may have mentioned it earlier. It's just that nostalgia, you know, and it's kind of funny because there was a song, where can my baby be? What is the title of that one? And
Someone took her away from me.
yeah, that's the one.
Pearl Jam did it.
And my father,
and
was it? I don't know what. I can't remember what current band, and I say current like I think it was the 90s. Yeah, Pearl Jam.
Yeah.
And I remember listening to it, and I said, "Oh my God, did they lose a bet?" Because my father was in the car seat next to me singing, and I was like, "Dad, you're cool." And he's like, "I grew up with this stuff." So I think, you know, there's a certain amount of nostalgia.
I was amazed that song caught on. I mean, to me, that's a very curious song. It was like, you know, what do they call death rock or something, you know? Like, I mean, of all the songs for Pearl, I agree. Like, why did they do that, you know? But there's no accounting for taste, you know?
Yeah, you know, quite honestly, I would put money down that they lost a bet.
It could be. Yeah, that would explain it all. But yeah, that was from 1964, I think, originally.
Yeah.
One of those weepy songs about somebody getting in a car wreck or whatever happened. I can't remember.
Tim, Meredith and I are both writers at heart. That's how we pay our bills, is doing a lot of writing, this kind of stuff. we actually did, because we started doing these interviews like this because I hated transcribing, doing recorded interviews and then trying to transcribe it into articles. It sucked ass. So we know how writers are. And even though, you said, you're no John Grisham, you have to pay the bills, but this book just came out like 2 or 3 months ago. Is there something a project that you're working on next in this same kind of field of music?
No, I mean, the way publishing is now, I mean, I really finished working on this not long before it was published, probably in August, and revising it in September. I had a few ideas in the back of my head, but nothing that I'm going to be willing to right now invest the time that is required for these. I tell people about writing books. I said, make sure it's a topic you're really turned on by, because the books, type of books that I do, they're all factual. They all need to be checked. They all need to be double checked. And, if it's not something that you're really turned on by yourself, it would really seem like the worst type of labor you could do. But if you are turned on by it, then it's sort of fun, even though it's work. And I remember back when I was first doing my first book, Sounds Like Teen Spirit, I'd have to, it was a lot of more trips to the library back then, but although I still spend time in the library now. But I used to tell people, well, you don't have it where you guys live, but if on a 20-degree night where it's snowing or sleeting or something, and you're driving by the library, and you make sure it's something that you're going to want to go in there and devote the time to, you want to do it. You're not like, oh my God, I hate to do that. But you want to do it because you can't wait to discover the next new thing that you can share with people. So anyway, that's my only thought for any prospective writers out there.
Yeah, well, for the creative process, it hurts so good. See what I did there?
and Meredith can attest to this. We like I said, we do a lot of writing to pay the bills, and Meredith has to do research on some things that she says kills her soul.
They're soul suckers.
And because it is stuff that neither one of us is interested in, but it does help pay the bills. And that's the kind of thing, though, with your writing, that everything that you do does require that research. What Meredith and I like doing is fiction. It's just coming out of here. We pay the bills with the stuff that has to be researched, and it sucks. But we do what we have to do.
There's a special breed of writer, I think.
And we do, what pays the bills for the first part of the day, and then we go and do what we like to do for the rest of the day. And I figure that's kind of like what you have to do is you have to pick and choose those, because like you said, there's a lot of work that's going to go into these. But I do have to know, is there one group, one band, one artist that is your golden cup? This is the one that I would really like to have all access to be able to write the definitive book on. Do you have your holy grail like that, or it just kind of comes to you when it comes to you?
Not really, because really the books I've done, I've sort of done on my own with, without really participation or sometimes cooperation from people. I mean, I've talked to people, I've gotten some good insights from people, but I've never thought about doing like one of those sort of authorized biographies, which sort of sounds like what you're talking about. But I don't know. I try to come up with an idea that hasn't been done before, that gives people a new way of looking at the subject. I mean, I think Zappa or somebody said one time, it's not just what's inside the frame, it's where you place the frame. So if you can find a way to place the frame around the topic that nobody's placed it there before, that's sometimes what I think of what I do.
Mm-hmm. And cool. We are actually nearing the end of our hour. Matthew, do you want to ask that final question?
Well, I do, but first, Tim, why don't you tell everybody, where they can find this book, and is there someplace they can find the other books, or do they got to go searching for it on Amazon? And then where can they follow you? Are you into social media and all of that stuff that folks can cyber stalk you?
Yeah, for cyber stalkers, it's most of my social media I do on Twitter because it's so easy. I'm not a fan of Facebook where you have to write a 10 paragraph thing and then they get on you for the misspellings and everything. I much prefer Twitter to just link to something or put up a song or something like that. So my Twitter handle is @TimEnglishBooks, and I'm trying to remember the beginning of that before the social media part. What was the question?
Where can they find the books? Where can they find the new book and the old books?
Yeah, all my books are up on Amazon. That's probably the easiest way for people to find them. Surprise.
And then, as I told you, we ask every single guest of Geek Speak this one question, and it is, if you could go back in time and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
That's a very good question. I guess it would be not to worry so much, that things have a way of working out. And, I mean, we do have to spend a little bit of time worried, but usually the things we're worried about is just uncertainty. And once you find a path of how you're going to tackle an issue, that helps reduce your worry, I think, a lot. So that's one thing I've learned. I've also learned, I think sometimes it's best to keep your mouth shut than to say something. When I've had people, I've lost both my parents now, and now that they're gone, I sometimes think you're thankful for all the arguments that you didn't have. And I think about that, and I tell that to people sometimes. So those are two things that I've learned along the way.
And you're so right on. I did not get along with my parents growing up. We butted heads. I moved out at 16. I still finished high school. And then me and my dad became really good friends later on. And now both of my parents are gone. I've had to go through so many funerals in life, and it freaks me out when somebody says, "Oh, I've been to 2." I'm like, how the hell? I've buried 2 before I was 4. Wow. But you're right. When your parents are gone and you don't have that to talk with, to go with it really. And I did it, Meredith. I couldn't make it through one freaking show without doing it. I lost my train of thought. It happens every time, Tim. And this time, though, I'm going to blame somebody else, because my brother said something to me, and I saw it, and I read it, and then I lost my train of thought. But Tim,
well, I was just going to say, the older I got, the more brilliant my parents became. And that's
when you're going. No wonder they smacked the crap out of me for that. I would have done the same thing.
Well, hopefully all kids get to that revelation that you had. I know a few that aren't there quite yet.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my dad, I truly wish that he was still alive, because I put him through hell. And at the time, I always thought it was his fault. And he was gone before I got to that point of, holy shit, I understand, Dad. I understand. And so I tell it to him all the time. I know he's going to be like Nelson from The Simpsons. When I get up to heaven, he's just going to be going, ha ha, because he just knows now. Because I had 2 daughters and they were perfect. The mom curse didn't work. I hope you have 2 10 times worse than you. It didn't work. My girls were great. Yeah. But then I had stepkids, and that's where the curse kicked in. But right. Tim, we have really enjoyed having you on here. Folks, if you have not already figured it out, Tim has a new book that is out, and it is called John Lennon, the 1980 playlist. And this covers a lot of stuff that you are not going to find in other books about John Lennon. We've covered a lot of it tonight, or some of it tonight, not a lot of it. There's just so many other topics that he covers about John, and the inspirations behind Double Fantasy, and just the influences on his career. And so make sure you check it out. It's available on Amazon. And then you've got the Sounds Like Teen Spirit and the other one, Popology, which are both, like I said, I am definitely picking up Sounds Like Teen Spirit. I've got a copy of the John Lennon. the PDF one, I'm going to read it because it's in my inbox and I get the chance to read it. That's
Cool.
the kind of cool stuff. That's the cool stuff we get here at Geek Insider.
Yeah.
But Tim, for real, I know you said you don't have anything planned right now, but the next time that you have something musically inclined coming out, please let us know. Nudge your PR person, tell them to reach out to Geek Insider. We'd love to have you back. Don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere, Tim. We want to say bye off the air, but we're going to wrap up and say goodnight.
Okay. All right. Good night, Matthew. Good night, Meredith.
Thank
Good
you
night.
very much, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. And tomorrow at 4:30 in the afternoon, we have Cody Renee Cameron, and she is going to be talking about her latest film. Make sure that you tune in to Geek Insider. Head over to the YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, and that way you
tell them about Monday. Tell them about Monday. We just wrapped that up. The K3 Sisters Band.
Yeah, K3 Girl Band. And we actually have Jess Harnell, who's a voice actor as well. So, I mean, we've got a pretty busy schedule.
And he's not only a voice actor, he's got a band, which that's what he's coming on to promote. But this guy he does Wacko on the Animaniacs. He does some stuff on Pinky and the Brain. He's voiced Transformers in the Transformer movies. He does all kinds of crazy voices. Rick and Morty. The list goes on the animated movies. We don't really get to talk to him a lot about the animated stuff.
Just make sure you tune in to Geek Insider on YouTube. Hit the notifications bell so you know exactly when we're going live. And check out our social media. On that note, you guys have a great evening. Thank you for tuning in. If you're listening on the podcast, make sure you hit the subscribe button and tell all your friends, because if you don't, you might have to turn in your geek card. At Geek Insider, we foster relationships with those in the geek sphere so we can give our audience the insider view of entertainment, tech, and more.